of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with The Mark Stone Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Halloween? Thanks, but no thanks. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got a very busy 2 hours. In the big question, can Rishi Sunak sort out Brexit? We'll debate that with politics legend Anne Widdecombe and the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most influential Conservative politicians of his generation. Sir Alan Duncan served under Theresa May, David Cameron and Michael Howard. He's live in the studio after 10. What does he think of Rishi Sunak? And in my big opinion, this is not a drill. The Rishi Sunak bounce is here as our new Prime Minister reverses the Tories' slump in the polls. He's got Labour sweating. A busy 2 hours. I'll see you after the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. It's 1 minute past 9. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Kent police have confirmed a man who was found dead at a nearby petrol station following an arson attack at a migrant processing centre in Dover. It's after a man drove up to the facility and threw several homemade devices which had fireworks attached to them. Border Force and military personnel were seen extinguishing a fire along the perimeter. A Reuters photographer who witnessed the incident says the man then drove to a nearby petrol station where he claimed his own life. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has described the incident as distressing. Several children are among those who've been killed after a suspension bridge collapsed in India. Hundreds of people are thought to have fallen into the river in Gujarat province, the government officials saying at least 81 people have been killed. The 230-metre bridge had only reopened to the public last week after it was closed for 6 months for renovations. The West has accused Russia of weaponising food after the country suspended a Black Sea grain deal. Moscow's move follows a claim that its fleet in Crimea was attacked by drones, which it says have now been recovered and analysed. Russia's ambassador to Washington suggested British military specialists helped Ukraine organise the strike, which the UK denies. A teenager has been charged with the murder of a university student who was stabbed in Manchester. Luke O'Connor died in hospital after he was attacked on Wednesday. 19-year-old Shiloh George Pottinger has been remanded in custody and will appear in court on Monday. A series of Royal Mail strikes planned for the next 2 weeks have been called off. The Communication Workers Union says it's decided to delay the action after receiving a letter from the company's legal team. Members of the CWU are involved in a long-running dispute over pay and working conditions. The union says strikes will resume on the 12th of November. And the number of rough sleepers in London has increased by 21% in a year. City Hall figures show there were over 5,000 people on the capital streets between April and September. The London Mayor Sadiq Khan is urging the government to take immediate action to tackle rising bills and housing costs. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Mark, it's back to you.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight, where I've already made quite a mess. There you go. But listen, I do my own dirty work and we'll clear that up after the show. But here's the question. Can Rishi Sunak clear up Brexit? Can he make a success of Brexit? We'll debate that with politics legend Anne Widdecombe and the former First Minister of Northern Ireland and GB News star Arlene Foster. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most influential Conservative politicians of his generation. Sir Alan Duncan served under Theresa May, David Cameron and Michael Howard. He's live in the studio after 10. What does he make of Rishi Sunak? And in the news agenda later this hour, with a huge focus on the wealth of Mrs. Sunak and rumours that Carrie Johnson was dictating environmental policy to Boris, how important is the Prime Minister's other half, and should there be boundaries around their role? Now, reacting to that story and many more tonight are my fantastic panel of presenter and political commentator Emma Wolfe, political editor of the Sunday Mirror, true Fleet Street legend Nigel Nelson, and a good friend of mine, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt. Now, I want to hear from you throughout the show, partly because I need a cleaner for the studio, but also anything you react to. If you agree or disagree, let me know your thoughts. mark@gbnews.uk. This programme has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. So for the next 2 hours, big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with this one. Well, who'd have thunk it? The Rishi bounce is in full flight. A new poll from Opinium shows that Labour's lead has dropped 6 points from 27 to 16, whilst the Tories have gained 5 back. Keir Starmer's party now have the support of 44% of voters compared to 28% backing the Tories. This looks like the beginning of a recovery. But it doesn't stop there. A poll in today's Observer reveals that Sunak has overturned Labour's lead in terms of who voters trust most to manage the economy. 33% said they would prefer a Conservative government led by Rishi Sunak to manage the nation's finances, with only 29% choosing a Labour government led by Keir Starmer. Tory supporters are coming back too. Last week, only 41% of Conservative voters would choose a Tory government led by Liz Truss. Well, the latest poll shows that 88% now choose a government led by Rishi Sunak. And last but not least, Sunak's personal ratings are particularly noteworthy. A new poll by BMG shows more voters believe Sunak would make a better Prime Minister than Keir Starmer. All of this after less than a week in office. Poor old Liz Truss's honeymoon was a blink and you'll miss it affair. But I think it's likely that a feel-good factor around this new PM will be with us for weeks, if not months to come. Why? Because he's hit the ground running and sent out all of the right messages. Like this story in The Sun this week, that he's going to end woke policing, instructing officers to give up the Macarena and love-bombing protesters, and instead take up enforcing the law, ensuring that coppers police the streets, not tweets, and apprehending burglars, muggers and rapists rather than housewives on Facebook. And the Telegraph report that Sunak is going to go further in the war on woke by introducing laws that protect the status of biological women and female-only spaces, and enforcing the legal primacy of biology over gender, as well as clamping down on bonkers and highly inappropriate so-called sex education classes to our youngsters, telling them that they're in the wrong body because they like dressing up or they've had a bad day. Now, Sunak has also decided to skip the COP27 summit. Again, brilliant messaging. He's making it clear to the British people that his priority is the economic emergency in this country, that he hasn't got time to jump on a private jet and sip organic champagne with Bill Gates and Tony Blair, that he needs to be here, working hard night and day to tackle the national debt and especially inflation, which is at the root of the cost of living crisis. And his decision to cop out of COP27 is ideologically significant too, because it suggests that he's pushing back on the undebated, unproven and undemocratic net zero agenda, which threatens to decimate the economy and destroy our way of life, all whilst China, India, America and Brazil burn fossil fuels for fun. Of course, we've got to take care of the planet, and who doesn't want clean, sustainable renewables? And, of course, nuclear in the years ahead. On climate, my mind is open. It's clearly complex. But it's quite clear from this bold move of not attending COP27, which is annoying all the right people, that Sunak does not worship at the altar of climate change. Meanwhile, he has shown political courage by reinstalling the disgraced Home Secretary Suella Braverman just 6 days after her ignominious departure. Now, I'm a fan, but Suella Braverman is a bit of a loose cannon. She's made mistakes sending official messages via a private email address, unacceptable for a Home Secretary. And with allegations she may have shared politically sensitive documents in recent months, she appears to be leakier than the Titanic. I'll be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if her next move is to publish the nuclear codes on TikTok. But Sunak is not a stupid man. Why would he create a headache for himself by reappointing and today defending someone that many consider politically damaged goods? Because she's serious about tackling illegal immigration, that's why. And when it comes to voters' concerns alongside the NHS and the economy, stopping people entering this country illegally, at the moment 1,000 a day, is at the top of the list. We are a tolerant and welcoming country, but will not tolerate or welcome people breaking the law, chucking their phones and identification in the sea as they make that perilous crossing and running for the hills on arrival. It's unsustainable, it's unedifying, and it's unacceptable. It's fantastic to have a Prime Minister that's willing to make an unpopular appointment by taking the view that policy trumps politics, and that if Braverman gets the job done in the Home Office, securing our borders and making the streets of Britain safe, she was worth the political baggage that accompanied her. I hope she stays. Meanwhile, international financial markets are warming to our new Prime Minister as well. The Sunak bounce has been replicated in the value of the pound, which is comfortably where it was before that ill-fated mini-budget, if not higher. Government borrowing has nosedived as well, and with unemployment historically low and inflation having likely peaked, partly thanks to falling energy prices, dare we dream that happier days lie ahead and that we've actually got a Prime Minister that's up to the job and can deliver for Britain? Plus, Sunak is a well-reported lockdown sceptic who stopped Christmas being cancelled last year, as reported by the Mail on Sunday, so we can hopefully rule out any ruinous COVID measures this winter. Christmas is safe with Santa Sunak. Ho, ho, ho. With everything he has said and done so far, our new PM has demonstrated he has two things: a smart political antenna and a backbone. It's early days and many things can go wrong, but I can't think of a stronger debut in recent political history. He's not everyone's cup of tea, but if he stays on this path, I think the sky's the limit. Far from dreading the next election, the Tories might start looking forward to it. And at this rate, it could come Sunak rather than later. Now, I'm going to get the Dyson out to sort out that pumpkin, but what do you think? Do you feel that Rishi Sunak has made a good start as Prime Minister? Mark at gbnews.uk. I'll get to your emails shortly, but let's get the view of my stellar panel tonight. Best-selling author and columnist Emma Wolfe, the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People, Nigel Nelson, and historian and journalist and broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt. David, let me start with you. Your verdict on this new Prime Minister?
He's clearly calmed the markets, and that's to be welcomed. It means that government borrowing is low and means that the likelihood of bankruptcy for the nation is much less. I'm less optimistic than you, however, Mark. I think one of the rather disappointing things of Mr Sunak's first week in office is his reinstating of the moratorium on fracking. Now, critics of fracking will say, well, this isn't going to help us in the immediate term. No, it's not. But this is the same line of reasoning that led Nick Clegg, primarily, along with others 10 years ago, 12 years ago, to say that we weren't going to have any more nuclear power stations. And look where that's left us. I think there are other signs as well that Mr Sunak is reverting to orthodoxy, and an orthodoxy that has left us in a very poorly prepared position for the future. I think he hasn't shown, for instance, that he's open to enterprise. For instance, allowing Mr Hunt to scrap and to retain the scrapping of the IR35 revision, that desperately awful piece of Brown Act legislation that penalises people who want to go out and work for themselves and to start small businesses. So, as yet, I haven't really seen any great grounds for optimism from what Mr Sunak has done. However, it could well be that he is simply trying to calm things down, and then we will see over the coming weeks and months a more positive, a more conservative vision. Mr Sunak, we know, is an extremely intelligent man and also a student of politics. So I think perhaps he has in mind, as he being a former Chancellor, another former Conservative Chancellor, Ian MacLeod, who said famously in 1970s, while the Socialists scheme their schemes and the Liberals dream their dreams, the Conservatives have a job to do. And I think if that is Mr Sunak's modus operandi, then we can in fact be a little happier than we were under the chaos of mistrust.
However, I've always been pro-fracking. I think if we've got resources beneath our feet, we should be using them. But do you think this was realpolitik from Rishi Sunak, given the fact that objections, particularly in Tory constituencies, probably meant that fracking was never going to happen anyway? And do you not take succour from the fact that he won't be attending COP27?
That is good. I agree with you entirely on that. That is good because it shows that he's not going to be browbeaten by the international climate lobby. But there is a huge problem in this country, and it goes throughout England, not Scotland and Wales because they're not so Tory. It's that one of the great blocks on our doing what we need to do as a nation is the NIMBYism of Tory constituencies. We had this with house building. We have this with energy. And unless and until a Conservative Prime Minister is willing to say to his activists and to members of his party that these situations will only and can only become worse until you all realise that your constituencies are going to be affected by the building of new houses, by the extension of infrastructure, then I don't see how any of these problems can be affected. When we have migration on the scale we do, 1,000 a day, the already great pressures on infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, policing services, local council services and housing are going to increase. And unless people in the Green Shires of England accept that occasionally a brownfield site might need to be developed or the boundaries of their towns extended by an acre or two, there is no possibility of these problems being ameliorated. And so I should like to see Mr Sunak build up his courage to take on the vested interests within his own party and with his own activists so that the country as a whole can benefit.
Interesting word from David Oldroyd-Bolt, Emma Wolfe. Courage. Something I think that Rishi Sunak has demonstrated in just 5 days in office, particularly the reappointment and defending today of our Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. I know she's not perfect, she's made mistakes, she's leakier than the Titanic, if we're led to believe, but she's serious about tackling those illegal crossings, which make the public furious. It's my view that Sunak is off to a flyer.
Yeah, I think I was a supporter of Rishi Sunak from the very start, unlike you, Mark. I didn't think that Liz Truss had... Well, I think she's been way out of her depth all the way through. I thought she was out of her depth as Foreign Secretary, and it was ludicrous to appoint her as Prime Minister.
Well, you know what, I will correct you on that, because I called for Rishi Sunak to be our Prime Minister in January of this year, after that Mail on Sunday expose revealed that Boris was going to cancel Christmas He was going to give in to the sage professors and actually have a lockdown in December, and it was a holy triumvirate of Lord Frost, Rishi Sunak and Jacob Rees-Mogg who talked him out of it. And at the start of the actual contest, it was obviously it was about a 8-horse race, wasn't it? I went for Rishi, but I accepted the election of Liz Truss, but it wasn't to be. And here's the point, Emma. He has now sort of risen like a phoenix from the ashes that was Truss's premiership.
Absolutely, Mark. And I thought that I was delighted when he was appointed. And I thought that when we saw him last Wednesday at PMQs, I thought he played a blinder. I think he's smart. I think he's slick. I mean, maybe too slick for some. But he's agile, he's intelligent, he can flip questions. He's always got, he's got the rejoinder. He's very good, and it's a reminder of quite how spectacularly Keir Starmer, looking at the Labour, looking at their slump from that, astonishing lead that they had, that's already declining, and that's only after, 5 days? And let's remember, a lot can go wrong. A lot can go wrong for Rishi Sunak. It's, as you say, it's such early days. But I think this is a reminder of how spectacularly Keir Starmer has failed to resonate with the public. After how many years has he been in? Is it 2 or 3 years now that we've had Keir Starmer at the head of the Labour Party? And he's not resonating with voters at all.
Yes, over 3 years now. Nigel Nelson, you've been reporting on political matters for decades. I can't recall a stronger start to high office than what we're seeing under Rishi Sunak, perhaps Blair in '97.
Yes, certainly Blair. I think also Cameron and obviously Margaret Thatcher. So there certainly have been people who've actually started better, but then again, they weren't facing quite as many problems as Rishi Sunak is. I think I take exception to both yours and Emma's interpretation of this poll. It still gives Labour 102 overall majority. So it was bound to happen that once we got rid of Liz Truss and the economic trashing that she foisted on us, there was bound to be a bounce for basically whoever became the next Prime Minister. So the poll doesn't actually show anything. The poll, all that is showing is polls are going back to more where they would be. It was totally unrealistic to think that Labour had a 30-point lead or anything like that. When it comes to the actual detail of what Rishi Sunak is doing, I do think it's a mistake for him not to get a COP. It seems to me that if you believe that climate change really is the most important issue facing us globally, the least you can do is turn up for a couple of days and also give him a chance to meet people like President Macron, Joe Biden. It'd be the first time he'd met them since he was Prime Minister.
Well, I think that the greatest concern for my viewers is heating their homes and feeding their families, keeping their jobs and paying their rent or their mortgage. And that's the clear messaging from his decision to opt out of COP27, Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't sort of diminish the huge plateful he's got to actually deal with. I just think that he will have to travel. He's got Jeremy Hunt there to sort out the autumn statement, and it is a mistake not to go. His other mistake, obviously, was to bring back Suella Braverman, and he only did that because he was backed into a corner. He thought he needed her support. He probably didn't, and I'm sure he will regret having her back, and I doubt she'll be there for very long.
I agree with that. I don't think that he knew. I don't think anyone knew the extent of her leakiness. This stuff has come out in the past few days. I think he made a mistake in reappointing Suella Braverman. She won't last.
As I
it's
mentioned,
going to get worse and worse and worse. She won't last.
As I mentioned, Emma, I think that Rishi Sunak has demonstrated a backbone and political antennae because he knows that the public perceive Suella Braverman as someone that's serious about stopping these illegal migrant crossings, which is a massive priority for most Brits.
He is the Prime Minister. He could have found somebody else who works for him, the Home Secretary works for him, who, if he's serious about tackling illegal immigration, and that is absolutely a priority for voters, for the people of this country, I agree with that. I also think it was a mistake I agree with Nigel about COP27. I think the UK need to be at these. We are currently still the holders. We're handing over. Alok Sharma is handing over, effectively, from COP26, which was it's less than a year ago, November, in Glasgow. We were talking about climate change, but we were serious about climate change. We're handing over to Egypt now, and the UK, the Prime Minister's not there. You could have gone for 24 hours. That's what prime ministers do.
Well, I don't think that's an accident either. What's your view on this?
The King's not there
David?
and the Prime Minister's not there.
David, I think that this is, again, intentional. It's messaging from Rishi Sunak.
Absolutely.
I've got so many viewers, David, in the Red Wall, and they're not happy about the net zero agenda. Even Boris supporters were angry about it. They don't feel that they voted for that. They thought it was Carrie Johnson's idea. And this will go down well in those working-class communities to see a Prime Minister focused on British problems, not sipping organic champagne with Bill Gates.
I think that's the point. The messaging is good, and it shows that Mr Sunak is determined to spend his first month in office addressing domestic concerns at a time when energy bills are going to cripple people if we have a hard winter, all of the signs of which are there, and at a time when people are really worrying about interest rates affecting their mortgage payments and meaning that their rents will rise. I think it is just and correct that he spends this first month at home turning to domestic concerns. We have made, I think, over the past 10, 12 years, great international noises about our commitment to doing what we can as a relatively small emitter of carbon dioxide to address climate change. But at this point, when the world's largest emitters of these noxious gases are not actually doing what they should be doing, I think it would be a meaningless gesture and a rather futile gesture for Mr Sunak to think that going to COP27 is the correct priority for him now. If he is here, and if he's saying to the people of Britain, I take you seriously, I take your concerns seriously, and I see how badly you were affected by the uncertainty of the Truss government, I think that will play extremely well for him. And I agree that this is, of course, a bounce of a new incumbent into the office. That was bound to happen. But if he can build on that support, as you said at the top of the programme, there is no reason that, given we have 2 years until the next election, he should not go into that with a good chance of winning.
If I had a cabinet, it would contain Emma Wolfe, Nigel Nelson and David Oldroyd Bolt. I think you'll agree we've got a dream team group of commentators tonight reacting to the big stories of the day. Later this hour, I'll be asking them about the role of the Prime Minister's other half. What are the rules? What are the boundaries? Should they be a sort of chilled out, distant figure like Dennis Thatcher or a proactive policymaker like Carrie Johnson? But next in the big question, can Rishi Sunak sort out Brexit? I'll be joined by Northern Ireland's former First Minister Arlene Foster and politics legend Anne Widdecombe. See you in 2.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
A very big reaction to my big opinion monologue. I think Rishi Sunak has got off to a cracking start. He's already considered by a majority of voters to be a better Prime Minister than Keir Starmer. And he's only been there 5 days, not even a week. But let's get to your views. Pat says, Mark, for goodness sake, your panellist Emma Wolfe should leave Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, alone. At last, this country has a Home Secretary who genuinely wants to do something about the ridiculous spectacle of 1,000 illegal freeloaders arriving daily to drain us of money and hotel spaces. We are laughed at by the world. That's from Pat. Paul says, hi, Mark. Yes, Rishi has started well. There's a long way to go, but as a party member who made the mistake of voting for Liz Truss, I'm happier than I was 2 weeks ago. He could bring us right back into the game. Gary says, we always get strong words from the Tories, but get very little in reality. I will never trust the Conservatives again. Reform UK for me. This from Steve. If the Tories mess about with the triple lock pledge, the pensioners will have their revenge at the next election. That and stopping illegals in dinghies are a must, says Steve. Sunak will never exceed 99%. As I will never vote for him as leader, says Annie. He betrayed Boris, betrayed me and other Tory party members, rejecting their choice of leader and taking her place in an undemocratic coup. Betrayed pensioner electorate last year, reducing promised manifesto triple lock. No vote for me. Annie's not having it. How about this from Alan? After watching Yvette Cooper today, Labour's response on migration is non-existent. Sort this and win the general election. As for COP27, great call, not going. It's a misuse of money. Well, look, I'll get to more of your brilliant emails shortly, but it's time now for this. Yes, it's time for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. And our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has an overflowing in tray. Policing, defence, illegal immigration and the small matter of an economy in crisis. However, another important policy upon which he will be held accountable at the next election is Brexit. Remember Brexit? Can the Prime Minister do something about the Northern Ireland Protocol, which places a border down the Irish Sea, therefore dividing our wonderful country? Something which is causing huge tension within communities in Northern Ireland and which is damaging the Northern Ireland economy. And can this new incumbent at number 10, who backed Brexit from the start, make a success of it and tap into the opportunities it brings? Well, here's a man we know pretty well who had a go at it. Of course, Boris is out of office now. He got Brexit done, but can we really fulfil its potential? Can Rishi Sunak sort out Brexit? That's tonight's big question. To debate that, I'm delighted to welcome former government minister and best-selling author Anne Widdecombe and the former First Minister of Northern Ireland and GB News presenter Dame Arlene Foster. Dame Foster, Arlene, let me start with you. Do you think that Rishi Sunak has the political will, the political courage and gumption to get Brexit sorted?
Well, it's lovely to be with you, and I'm delighted to be on with Anne this evening to address this question with you, Mark. I think the important thing is that he needs to have the courage and the confidence to really try and reset in relation to Brexit, because over this past number of years with COVID, with the crisis within his own party, the opportunities that we should have been trying to achieve on Brexit haven't been really materialising. And I think what we need to be refocusing on is global UK, and I say UK, not Britain, and therein lies the problem. Because, of course, what we need to do, first of all, is to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's causing grave instability here in Northern Ireland. We don't have a devolved administration here at the moment. As you know, on Friday past, we came to a crunch point. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary of State, told us all along he was going to call an election in Northern Ireland, which of course he was legally under a duty to do. But when Friday came, he decided not to call an election, and instead he's going to speak to the parties this week. I think the Prime Minister has probably realised that there needs to be some space to get the protocol sorted out. But the first thing that must happen, of course, is that the European Union must change its mandate. I mean, I listen to people all the time saying we need negotiations with the European Union to sort out the protocol instead of legislation in the House of Commons. Well, that's all very well, but the EU haven't changed their mandate since the start of all of this. And until they do that, we're not going to get any progress from the EU.
Why do you think the Northern Ireland Protocol is there? It feels political to me, Arlene.
Well, it is political. I mean, there were other ways to deal with the issues of protecting the European single market, which we're told is what the protocol is all about. It was there to protect the EU single market and to protect the Belfast Agreement. Quite clearly is not protecting the Belfast Agreement. In fact, it goes against the Belfast Agreement in terms of those of us in Northern Ireland being able to be a part of the UK single market. And in relation to the EU single market, the risk to goods going into the EU single market is so small, it's very, very tiny, and could have been dealt with using alternative arrangements, whether that was small business exemptions, whether that was using technology. There was a myriad of things proposed, but the EU wasn't interested in dealing with those alternative arrangements. And frankly, it was a political decision, and one for which we are now suffering here in Northern Ireland.
And what's your judgment of Rishi Sunak, Arlene? Because he is, to a degree, a lifelong Brexiteer. I think he campaigned for our departure from the EU as a student at the School Debating Society. So Brexit is in his bones. It's in his DNA. He didn't change his mind like Liz Truss. Do you think that he's the man to make this happen? Do you think he would be brave enough to essentially tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, I was a little bit concerned in October, November of last year when there were reports that Rishi Sunak was one of the people in Cabinet that didn't want David Frost to trigger Article 16, in other words, to reset the Northern Ireland Protocol. And because of that, I thought that Liz Truss would be a better PM, frankly, for Northern Ireland to sort the protocol out. She brought forward the legislation, as you know, to the House of Commons when she was Foreign Secretary. However, I do bear in mind that he is a lifelong Brexiteer. He could have very easily, having come into the House of Commons as a new MP in 2015, have gone along with the establishment. He didn't do that. He was a Brexiteer at that time. And therefore, I hope he does show the courage to go along and say to the European Union, you need to change your mandate. We need to find a proportionate way of dealing with all of these issues. And at the moment, if you don't do that, then stability in Northern Ireland is at risk, and nobody wants that to be the case.
Anne Widdecombe, I think the government's former chief Brexit negotiator, the man that really got Brexit done, Lord Frost, could probably resolve this issue by standing firm on the Northern Ireland Protocol, potentially triggering Article 16. After all, we got that free trade agreement with the EU because he made it clear that Britain would walk away if the terms were not satisfactory. Do you think that Rishi Sunak can be as firm, and can he get the job done?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, if it were wholly within Lord Frost's disposal, I wouldn't have any worries at all. I'm not sure how tough Rishi will be on this. Yes, he's a Brexiteer, and I'm quite certain that any PM wants to get Northern Ireland sorted out well before the next general election. But it does mean actually being willing to trigger Article 16 if necessary. It does mean carrying through the legislation that Liz Truss introduced. And it does mean, and this is the crucial bit, it does mean saying to the EU, we have negotiated for long enough and it hasn't resulted in agreement. And it is crucial that Britain can trade within her own borders. And at the moment we can't. And therefore, at least at the moment we can't without a great deal of difficulty. And therefore, deadline, ultimatum. That is what he's got to do. Terribly politely, terribly diplomatically, but that is what he's got to do. And if he won't do it, we'll still be talking in 10 years' time.
What might the consequences be, Anne Widdecombe? After all, we're in an economic crisis. We've got raging inflation. We're probably in recession. We don't want a trade war with the EU, do we?
No, we don't want a trade war with the EU. But on the other hand, I doubt very much if the EU wants a trade war with us. And it's a question really of who blinks first. But there is no need for any of this because Boris's proposal, for example, a green channel for goods going only to Northern Ireland, a red channel for goods heading on to the EU. Something as simple as that could have been worked upon. But as usual, they're obstructive for one reason only. They want us to pay for Brexit. And that is what we've got to face down. And then after that, I think there won't be the talk of trade wars, because if we can just get rid of this business that this is a tit-for-tat situation, then we might make progress. But first and foremost is Northern Ireland. They are part of the UK. They are part of our internal trade. That is what takes priority, not relations with the EU. I mean, when you talk about the serious situation we're in, have you seen what the inflation rate is in some of their countries? Dear heaven.
Absolutely right. And a far deeper recession. Deutsche Bank are predicting a contraction in the German economy of between 3% and 4%. Germany's the basket case, the sick man of Europe, not the UK. Arlene, I'll come back to you in just one moment. And let me just remind you, of course, that you left the Conservative Party to join the Brexit Party in 2019. So what about the Brexit bigger picture, setting aside the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is completely unsustainable and it's a nightmare for Northern Ireland, the good people of Northern Ireland. But what about the rest of Brexit? Do you think this Prime Minister can tap into its enormous potential, particularly trade deals and the kind of economic bounce that it offers us?
I think the most disappointing thing about Brexit has been that so little advantage has been taken of it, other than the vaccination programme, which was the first big demonstration of how good it was to be out of the EU. There has been very little. Now, you know, one's got to be realistic about it. COVID is to blame for a lot of that. There wasn't a huge amount that could be done during those couple of years. But I don't hear anybody talking about, well, this is what we're going to do. You know, now we've got control, for example, of our own VAT. Or, you know, we don't hear anything about how we're going to take big advantage of Brexit. The exception, actually, was Liz Truss, who understood that we had to be competitive, and hence the cap on the banker's bonus and the upper tax limits and all the rest of it. And however bungled a job she made of it, at least she wanted to take advantage of Brexit. Now, I don't hear that from any of the others.
Arlene, a final thought with you briefly, if you can, which is how do you see this issue with the Northern Ireland Protocol playing out? Because it's a shocker for the people of Northern Ireland, the economy. And arguably, if the EU continue to dig their heels in, then they're partly responsible for the restarting of the Troubles. This is serious.
This is serious, but I think it's part of a bigger issue, because I'm always amazed that 6.5 years after the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, there are still those who continue to try and push us in another direction, and who want us to rejoin the single market, and who want us to be a part of the EU apparatus all over again. And those people are continuing to work behind the scenes to try and set the agenda. And I think that the Northern Ireland Protocol is very much a part of that, because they're using the Northern Ireland Protocol, cynically, I might add, to further their cause. being reckless about the damage that it can do to this part of the United Kingdom. And I think that that is so wrong, Mark. And I think people should be called up on that because we do remember that there was a German diplomat, I can't just remember his name, Anne might remember his name, who said at the time that Northern Ireland was the price of Brexit. So this is political. This is political. Yeah. We shouldn't think that this is just about trade. The trade issue is damaging. It's pushing up prices in Northern Ireland. It's minimising our choice. That is a problem. But it also goes to identity, and it very much goes to sovereignty, because here you have the European Union interfering in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. And of course, that goes against the Belfast Agreement, which everybody talks about the Belfast Agreement, but actually in the Belfast Agreement, it's very clear that the people of Northern Ireland are a full part of the United Kingdom until such times as they decide otherwise. And there's no sign of us deciding otherwise. So what we have here is actually the EU interfering within the United Kingdom, and it has to be dealt with. And I hope Rishi Sunak has the courage and has the confidence to go forward and say, hold on a second, I am the Prime Minister of the whole of the United Kingdom, and therefore I want to deal with this.
Arlene Foster, thrilled to have you on the programme. I love your programmes on GB News. The former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster, and a very good friend of this show, of course, former government minister and best-selling author. And I'm delighted to say the star of The Big Question every Sunday night for the rest of the year, the brilliant Anne Widdecombe. Thanks, Anne. See you in a week's time. Lots more to come. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most influential politicians of his generation. Sir Alan Duncan, Tory MP, served under the administrations of David Cameron and Theresa May. He tells his story after 10. But we asked you on social media, can Rishi Sunak sort out Brexit? 68.7% say no, 31.3% say yes. Well, he's got to prove a few people wrong. In my take at 10, the deadly legacy of lockdowns, shocking new data, the biggest I told you so in history, plus the papers at 10:30 with my brilliant panel. But next, how important is the Prime Minister's other half? See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We'll get to Prime Ministers' spouses next and the role they play, but I'm delighted to say that Emma Wolfe, David Oldroyd-Bolt and Nigel Nelson are with me as my panel. I'd love to pick up on the Brexit conversation. Can Rishi Sunak sort out Brexit? Emma Wolfe?
6 years since the vote, I just feel like the UK is a basket case. Everything has gone wrong. Forget recession. We're in depression. This country is so depressing at the moment.
Emma, you're talking us down. I mean,
I'm
I just
not
mentioned
talking us down.
Germany's about to have the mother of all recessions.
I don't care. I'm not talking about Germany. I'm not talking about Europe. I'm just talking... I don't think we've delivered on any of the promises. You know, these stunning trade deals that we were going to have around the world, all of that. I agree with Anne Widdecombe. I don't think we've taken advantage of many of the exciting things that Brexit offered. And I just feel economically, politically, socially, we're riven, we're, divided, more divided than ever. Just people hate each other. Remainers and Leavers still hate each other. So I think there's a lot to do to get out of this.
Well, it's not a very sunny outlook from Emma Wolfe. But what do you think? This is a major political challenge for Sunak, isn't it? And we don't know yet, in terms of his political courage, whether he's really willing to face off with the EU.
No, but the first thing he's got to do is get a government back in Northern Ireland, and the only way he can do that is to sort out the protocol. The problem is the same for him as it has been for the previous prime ministers. We signed up to this treaty. Europe doesn't want to change it. They want to keep the integrity of the single market. If you lose the protocol, you'll get a hard border back on between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and the danger of going back to violence. So there's a lot at stake for Rishi Sunak to try and sort out.
That's a spurious statement, isn't it, David? Because no one's going to erect a hard border between Northern Ireland and the south.
I think the key point was made by Anne Widdecombe, that this was always intended to be a sticking point. It was the most malicious thing that the European Union could have done. Yes, to try and sow dissent within the Union itself. And I agree with Emma that there have not been the advantages taken of all of the things that Brexit should have given us. And I was talking to a French banker the other day who said, when I say to people, you're going to Frankfurt or Hamburg, they say, oh, what have I done wrong? If you say you're going to London, they ask when the next plane is. There is so much that draws people to this country. And, for instance, the cap on bankers' bonuses should be gone. As I said on your programme a month ago, would we prefer having more bankers here, earning greater bonuses and paying more tax, or would we like this silly, pernickety little piece of regulation so that people who dislike enterprise can write in the pages of The Guardian about how good it is to penalise bankers? There are so many advantages we could take, and this is where I agree Mr. Sunak needs courage, but what he also needs is guile. What he really needs is political nous, so that he can use the great bounce that he's got coming into number 10 to get done all of the things that Ms Truss, I think, wanted to do but didn't have the political nous to do, and all of the things Mr Johnson wanted to do but was tripped up upon by his own political inadequacy.
Yes, it's a great test for Rishi Sunak. That, and I think the illegal migrant crossings as well. He's got support at home, though. A very happy marriage, of course. Rishi Sunak's lovely wife, Akshata Murthy, has spent the weekend moving the family into 10 Downing Street, hopeful that their stay in this iconic Georgian house will be longer than their predecessors. Mrs Sunak has been busy directing the removal men, as you can see here. So there you go, there's a few luxury goods. We know they've got a few bobs, so some excellent, probably Siemens dishwashers and other premium luxurious
Speculating
items.
about their silver goods.
Heels, sofa. I don't know. I can't even think of examples of posh stuff that people have got. But with such a focus... Is it a smeg?
It'll be a
that's
big
fridge, isn't it?
double smeg fridge. Freezer.
That sounds very posh indeed. I'm out of my league. I'm a Zanussi man. But with such
I'm
a
an
focus...
Argos man.
Argos, that'll do. With such a focus on her own family's wealth, although they are, as I mentioned, clearly happily married, is this lady a political headache for her own husband, given her wealth? We didn't hear too much from Liz Truss's other half. There wasn't time. But Boris Johnson was dogged by rumours that his partner, Carrie, was dictating government policy, particularly in relation to the environment. So what is the correct role for a prime ministerial spouse? Invisible and supportive like Dennis Thatcher or Philip May? Or a hands-on co-pilot like the aforementioned Carrie Johnson or perhaps Cherie Blair? David?
Well, I might take issue on the idea that Philip May was in any way dispassionate. This is a man who was deeply, deeply committed to the idea of Remain, and who we know that behind closed doors he made no secret of this. I think it's an extremely difficult balance to draw. If you are, as Carrie Johnson was, and as we know Dennis Thatcher was in his own less party political way, a political being, it's ludicrous to expect that just because your partner or husband or wife becomes Prime Minister, you'll be able to turn that side of your personality off. What we should expect, however, is that that partner does not have an undue influence on policy. And I think this was the great problem with Carrie Johnson, is that whether it was true or not, there was an immense perception among the public and among the media that she was influencing policy, particularly on environmental affairs. Now, we knew that Dennis Thatcher was an old-fashioned reactionary, die-hard Tory, but there was never, I think, any suspicion that Mrs Thatcher was influenced by that in her making of policy for the nation. We know, for instance, that Cherie Blair has deep, deep convictions on human rights, in which she's an eminent silk. And yet I don't think there was ever any real suspicion beyond conjecture and innuendo that she was influencing Mr Blair in his policy as Prime Minister. So I must say I feel desperately sorry for Rishi Sunak's wife, because Ms Murty is clearly a woman who dislikes the public glare and who would, if she could, vanish from it for the period of her husband's premiership. That being impossible, I think we have to give her the benefit of the doubt that she will be a dispassionate advisor and support, as any spouse is, to his or her husband or wife, given a role of this type.
Nigel, briefly, if you can, it is a terribly important role, actually, the spouse of the Premier, because it's one of the most demanding jobs in the country.
Sort of, but really...
I mean, it's not like being political editor of the Sunday Mirror, don't get me wrong.
It certainly isn't.
Mrs Nelson, there's a rock.
Well, exactly. But with Akshata, I mean, what she's got to do is support her husband, do receptions, do sort of few charities, things like that, not get involved, as David said, with policy, be more like Sam Cameron and Philip May, who kept well into the shadows. And I don't think she'd want to do it anyway, that she's never shown any sign of wanting to do it when she was Chancellor.
Do you know what the answer is? Just to be sozzled on gin and tonics like Dennis Thatcher in a private members club.
Go play golf.
In the Mall.
Absolutely.
You know what?
Give up the subtle bit.
Prime Ministers' spouses should be seen and not heard. How about that? Whatever their gender. What do you think? Are you concerned about the amount of influence that Carrie Johnson had on Boris? And what do you think about Mrs Murty, Ms Murty, of course, Rishi Sunak's wife? Do you think that her success and her family's success is a burden on his premiership? Let me know, Mark at gbnews.uk. Very excited, because coming up next in Mark Meets, one of the country's most influential politicians, certainly of his generation. It's Tory party former MP Sir Alan Duncan. We've also got the papers at 10:30, but next in My Take at 10, the disastrous legacy of lockdown. Biggest I told you so in history. See you in 2.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's exactly 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan Tonight. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most influential Conservative politicians of his generation, Sir Alan Duncan, who served under Theresa May, David Cameron and Michael Howard. He's live in the studio shortly. What does he make of our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak? Can his Conservatives win the next election? Plus, we've got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 with full panel reaction. And after this, my take at 10. New data suggests lockdowns are killing more people than COVID. Biggest I told you so in history. More on that shortly. And I'm not pulling my punches, particularly in relation to those celebrities who called for these ruinous measures. A day of reckoning is coming. Bring popcorn. First, the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Kent police have confirmed a man was found dead at a nearby petrol station following an arson attack at a migrant processing centre in Dover. It's after a man drove up to the facility and threw several homemade devices which had fireworks attached to them. Border Force and military personnel were seen extinguishing a fire along the perimeter. A Reuters photographer who witnessed the incident says the man then drove to a nearby petrol station where he claimed his own life. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has described the incident as distressing. Several children are among those who have been killed after a suspension bridge collapsed in India. Hundreds of people are thought to have fallen into the river in Gujarat province, with government officials saying at least 81 people have been killed. The 230-metre bridge had only been reopened to the public last week after it was closed for 6 months for renovations. The United Nations, Turkey and Ukraine have agreed on an October 31st plan to move 16 vessels currently in Turkish water a day after Russia halted Black Sea grain exports. It comes after the West accused Russia of weaponising food following the suspension of that grain deal. While Moscow's move follows a claim that its fleet in Crimea was attacked by drones, which it says have now been recovered and analysed. Russia's ambassador to Washington suggested British military specialists helped Ukraine organise the strike, which the UK denies. A teenager has been charged with the murder of a university student who was stabbed in Manchester. Luke O'Connor died in hospital after he was attacked on Wednesday. 19-year-old Shiloh George Pottinger has been remanded in custody and he'll appear in court on Monday. A series of Royal Mail strikes planned for the next 2 weeks have been called off. The Communication Workers Union says it's decided to delay the action after receiving a letter from the company's legal team. Members of the CWU are involved in a long-running dispute over pay and working conditions. The union says strikes will resume on November the 12th. And the number of rough sleepers in London has increased by 21% in a year. City Hall figures show there were over 5,000 people on the capital streets between April and September. The London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, is urging the government to take immediate action to tackle rising bills and housing costs. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Big stories, big guests and always big opinions. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most influential Conservative politicians of his generation. Sir Alan Duncan, who served under Theresa May, David Cameron and Michael Howard. He's live in the studio shortly. What does he make of Rishi Sunak? Plus, we got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 with full panel reaction. And what a panel tonight. Political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson. Historian and broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt and presenter and political commentator Emma Wolfe. Lots to get through, but first, my take at 10. Now there's a surprise. The Telegraph newspaper's excellent science editor, Sarah Napton, this weekend reports that the impact from COVID lockdowns is now killing more people than the virus. She writes that experts believe higher deaths from heart complaints and diabetes, as well as economic damage, mean the indirect effects of the pandemic will be greater than COVID itself. Many of us flagged this up at the time after identifying about 3 or 4 weeks into the course of the pandemic that this virus could not and would not be stopped. Where is the cost-benefit analysis, we cried? What will the impact be on people's lives and livelihoods as a result of the economic damage and restricted movements? And we also asked, why are we paying healthy people to stay at home for a potentially nasty virus, but mostly mild, from which over 99% of people will fully recover? Don't forget, we were told at the time, a third of people will have no symptoms. Some pandemic. Remember the government ad campaign, Act Like You've Got It? We inflicted all of this damage and loss of life for a virus over a third of all humans had to pretend they'd got. Act like you've got it. Dance like no one's watching. Sing like no one's listening. If only we hadn't listened to the terrible advice of SAGE or taken any notice of the junk modelling of Imperial College. Well, the chickens are coming home to roost. The National Health Service, which became the National COVID Service, was effectively mothballed throughout, ignoring far more serious illnesses like cancer, heart disease and diabetes. Take a look at this tweet from a viewer of the programme, which is typical of so many. Austin tweeted, "My friend has bladder cancer. They literally stopped his treatment during COVID." Let that sink in. They stopped treating his cancer because of COVID. What the F was the rationale? Meanwhile, in the same article, the Telegraph's Sarah Napton quotes top medic Amitava Banerjee, Professor of Clinical Data Science and Honorary Consultant Cardiologist at University College London, who fears the indirect effects of the pandemic will turn out to be greater than the harm from COVID itself, and thinks it's vital for future preparedness to actually look at the bigger picture when it comes to health policy. He says we should never, ever have had a pandemic preparedness team that did not consider the indirect and long-term effects. How right he is. If only he'd been in charge. Many got in there early with this obvious analysis, like the University of Bristol 2 years ago, who predicted 500,000 deaths from the economic cost of shutting the country down. Sadly, there's no end in sight to this madness. The EU are getting tooled up for more COVID tyranny with the announcement of a legally binding treaty for future lockdowns and mask and vaccine mandates in the bloc. Thank God we're out. Nothing can repair the damage of this disastrous, failed experiment, one which so many of us said wouldn't work and which has come at such a high societal, health and economic price. And that's before we get to the incalculable damage to kids, who, by the way, will pick up the financial bill for this bullshit in the years ahead. Well done, everyone. But we can begin to heal and move on if this historic mistake is never repeated. The cheerleaders for lockdowns, echo chamber scientists, woke medics and fear-mongering celebrities have blood on their hands. The death toll and the trail of human damage from these policies will be with us for years, if not decades to come. Those of us that called it out at the time were the bad people, apparently. Except it's been the biggest I told you so in history. Never forgive and never forget. And when it comes to any future disastrous COVID measures, 2 words must resonate. Never again. What's your view, your reaction to new research, new data suggesting that COVID measures have caused and will cause a greater loss of life than the virus itself? Mark at gbnews.uk. Reacting to that is my brilliant panel of best-selling author and columnist Emma Wolfe, the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and People, Nigel Nelson, and historian and journalist David Oldroyd-Bolt. Emma Wolfe, your reaction to this story, I mean, no shit Sherlock.
Yeah, absolutely no shit, Sherlock. It makes me so angry and so sad, and I think it was, you know, your monologue was absolutely brilliant, Mark.
Thank you.
This is, you know, a lot of things that happened during the lockdown can never be recovered. I have a neighbour who was married for 70 years and her husband was in hospital, taken into hospital, died alone. How do you get that back? How do you get that time back? It's absolutely horrific what lockdown did. It destroyed relationships, it destroyed people's education, it destroyed people's careers. I think it's created a society in which people are socially phobic, this wariness of each other. I still see people driving alone in cars, wearing masks. What are they protecting themselves from? Are they protecting themselves from themselves? It's completely crazy. I had a baby during lockdown. I was in hospital alone for 5 days with a baby. He was born surrounded by people wearing masks, and all he's ever seen is people with masks over their faces. It makes me so angry I can't even speak, Mark, and that's quite rare for me.
Indeed. Well, you won't be silenced on this programme. Nigel Nelson, do you think there could be a political backlash to this? I suppose the fact that it was the opposition and the government that rolled out these lockdowns mean that, in a sense, there's safety in numbers.
Well, certainly. But the whole thing is that the key to these figures is the word now. And this does become an argument over figures. So we're talking about 19,000 COVID deaths versus 23,000 deaths from other causes. But we seem to be forgetting what it was like when it first started. In total, we've had more than 200,000 deaths from COVID. The reason that the figures are so low now is because we've been vaccinated. I know you don't particularly like vaccines, but...
Well, no, listen, I think the vaccines are great if you're in a vulnerable group. I think that, you know, if you're somebody that risks hospitalisation or death, you'd be mad not to have it. I was against the vaccine mandates, really, and just the tyranny around the vaccine rollout. That was my objection.
Well, I'm against vaccine mandates too, but it's the vaccine that's done it. But when we go back to where it started, that modelling that you said was junk by Imperial College, modelling is not about a prediction, it's about a warning of what might happen. And the 500 deaths were what might happen if we did nothing. What lockdowns did, there may be an economic cost and the public inquiry will actually decide if it was worth it. What lockdowns did was control infections. If you look at the graphs, the moment that we locked down, infections went shooting down. When restrictions were lifted, infections went shooting up. Now, that's just a pure fact.
I mean,
whether you think it was worth doing is a whole different ballgame.
We don't want to revisit the COVID debate, in any great depth, but there's a peer-reviewed study suggesting that COVID cases were falling before each of the 3 national lockdowns. We also have the elephant in the room, Nigel, which is Sweden, who kept the schools open, kept businesses open, didn't have mask mandates, and fared better with COVID than Germany, France and Britain.
Well, hang on. I mean, clearly cases weren't going down when COVID first started. They went steadily up. And the whole point of lockdowns was to get it down and basically to protect the NHS. And the whole thing was the NHS was in danger of collapsing if they hadn't done it. Once the vaccine came in, there was less need then for lockdowns.
The NHS is meant to protect us. We're not meant to protect the NHS. And why?
But it would have collapsed, though. It would have collapsed.
Well, it shouldn't collapse. Why were the Nightingale hospitals?
Collapse, you're right.
Why were they empty? Why were they built and they were empty? Those hospitals, those emergency Nightingale hospitals.
David Oldroyd Bolt, your closing thoughts on this?
Well, I think I must take issue with Nigel. If you look at the figures, in the week before lockdown was imposed in March of 2020, figures were falling for infections because people were ameliorating their own behaviour. But on the wider question, I disagree with you that we must forgive. To forgive is Christian and good. We must never forget, and we must never again have our liberties taken away to control the population in this way, to shock the population into fear. Why is it now that you still go into shops and there are screens everywhere? Why are there still people going around as though they are in imminent danger of immediate death? What has been done psychologically to the nation is unforgettable and very hard to forgive, and the number of elderly people in care homes who are still being forbidden from seeing their families and therefore exacerbating dementia and exacerbating loneliness and unhappiness and depression is a scandal. This must never be allowed to happen again.
Thank you, David. Sorry to interrupt you. My brilliant panel return at exactly 10:30 for tomorrow's papers, and we've got some stunning stories coming in, so you won't want to miss that. But it's time now for this. Very excited about this. It's time now for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, showbiz, sport, business and beyond. Tonight, one of the most influential and respected politicians of his generation, Sir Alan Duncan, who served as Minister of State for International Development from 2010 to 2014 and as Minister of State for Europe and the Americas from 2016 to 2019. Sir Alan was the Member of Parliament for Rutland and Melton from 92 to 2019 and served under Prime Ministers Theresa May and David Cameron. Remember David Cameron? Those were the days. Following his departure from Parliament, he released his deliciously revealing diaries. In the thick of it, The Private Diaries of a Minister, which became a bestseller. It's out now and highly recommended. And I'm delighted to say that Alan Duncan joins me in the studio. Hello, Sir Alan.
Good evening.
First of all, you exited Parliament in 2019. You've really dodged a bullet, haven't you?
Certainly have. I got the timing right on that one. I could see it coming and I thought, get out under the wire. And I'm glad I did.
It's an amazing thing. Let's touch on Boris briefly, because there was no love lost between the two of you, was there?
That's not true, actually. I mean, we got on extremely well. But we have a very, very different approach to politics. I mean, he's the publicist, the ramshackle, look at me, come on, I'll sort it out. I tend to be a bit more conventional.
Methodical.
Methodical, yeah, punctilious, conscientious, if you like. I mean, perhaps that's the word that defines the difference between us. We got on very well because, actually, when I was his deputy in the Foreign Office, he was actually focusing on Brexit and getting rid of Theresa May and all that kind of stuff. But for Foreign Office stuff, I'd occasionally go to him and say, for God's sake, just don't be so flippant, because it does matter. And we never had a stand-up row. I had one sort of very tough moment with him when I sort of said, for God's sake, don't do that. They won't treat you as serious. Well, why don't they treat me as serious? I said, well, look in the bloody mirror, you know. But that's only happened once. So actually there was an affectionate sort of difference of approach.
Would you say in relation to the fact that, you know, perhaps he wasn't entirely across his brief or could be a bit flippant, would you link that to his comments in Parliament about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the untrue statement that she was a journalist whilst in Iran?
Actually, no, I wouldn't. He did
so
that.
Has he been stitched up by that?
No, I think the reaction was exaggerated. I mean, he made a comment in a committee hearing, and it was a bit loose.
Training journalists.
Yeah, which was imprecise and wrong. It conveyed, or at least it gave the Iranians a chance to say, ha, 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 look, you know, she's a quasi-spy. But actually...
You wouldn't, if you'd been Foreign Secretary, you would never have uttered those words.
No.
So was that Boris improvising, not across his brief, making it up as he went along?
Yeah, it was sloppy. And it came at a cost, but it was not as high a cost as the papers made out, because actually the reason we couldn't get her out is that we weren't prepared to hand over the £400 million debt, largely because Trump was in the White House. If Philip Hammond had approved it, they'd have sanctioned some of our banks. And so, in fact, it couldn't have happened even if Boris had been more precise with his words. So, I mean, it was a setback, but it wasn't as big as the papers made out.
Clearly, he's got remarkable qualities as a human being and as a public speaker. He's charismatic. He broke the Brexit deadlock, for which I think we all owe him a great debt of gratitude. He kept Jeremy Corbyn out of number 10 with that remarkable 80-seat majority in 2019. He should have stuck around. But...
I'm not sure it would have done me any good.
But was he, notwithstanding those achievements, and he needs to have credit for that, do you think he was unsuited to the role of Prime Minister? Was it a job too far for Boris?
Well, he had no discipline. I mean, he had the massive power of public appeal, and of course he seized on a single issue which cut across the blue-red divide. So in that sense, it was a remarkable political achievement. The other half of the country would argue that, although they're delighted to have a Conservative government, the legacy of Brexit is negative rather than positive. You know, that debate's going to go on for a long time. And my view is, as soon as we can move to a political discourse which doesn't mention Brexit but looks at the future of our economics, our social policy, it'll be better. I don't want to destroy your raison d'etre, but, you know, I think it's better if we do.
We want to move on.
Yeah, I think we've got to move on, particularly because of Ukraine and economic pain. That is obviously something we've got to confront. Your question was about Boris. I think that his lack of discipline was inevitably a flaw in his character, which was going to make his prime ministership vulnerable. And whereas some people say he was a great mayor, you know, he had good advisors and all that kind of stuff, I think partly because of the Brexit climate in which he was working, which was very, very divisive and very polarising, it didn't allow him to be, if you like, captured by people around him, which would have made him a better prime minister. But there's another issue which you've been going on about tonight, which, again, I think we need to move on from, but where I would give him very high marks, is COVID. I mean, can you imagine Jeremy Corbyn or Theresa May galvanising the country to take action on COVID? OK, you don't like lockdown, but nonetheless, that was the judgment. And only his force of personality, I think, could have done that.
Well, he pushed back against the excesses of SAGE. And, of course, he led
he
led Britain out of COVID, the first European country to really lift all COVID restrictions.
And the vaccine stuff was good.
I think credit where it's due, that we would have had longer and harsher lockdowns under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and God knows where we'd be with Jeremy Corbyn.
Dead.
Yeah, we would. We'd be dead
one way or another.
Well, basically, this studio would be lit with candles, and we'd be singing the red flag is flying here. So, what about the new incumbent, Rishi Sunak? Is it night and day? Has this guy got the skill set with which to be a great Prime Minister?
Look, I think the last few years have been, if you like, the politics of Brexit shockwaves. You know, everything's been bouncing off one wall or another, be it Theresa May, Boris Johnson, you know, Liz Truss. And these shockwaves are actually referendum shockwaves, which have, of course, deeply divided the Conservative Party. And a governing party that is divided is at serious risk of not being able to govern. And as of the moment, now, everyone thinks Labour's an automatic shoo-in. And if that is not arrested or somehow reversed, we're going to have a one-party state. If people say, to hell with the Conservatives, let's just go for Starmer, he looks all right these days, you're going to have a 250 Labour majority, and a year later we'll think, oh, my God, what have we done? Because the people behind Starmer are so appalling. With
Including
Rishi...
plenty of Corbynite MPs who have
of
not
course.
left the parliamentary party.
And a lot of people who have just not equipped to be members of parliament, let alone ministers. But let me answer your question. I mean, politics is 90% luck. And Rishi hit the jackpot when Sajid Javid resigned over the Cummings issue. So suddenly, bing, there he was. And he's got a very sort of interesting experience. I mean, a lot of his sort of background in some ways, you know, sort of school, university, business, I thought, you know, a bit like mine in some ways. So I feel some sort of identity with him. And I think he's very capable. Now, I think being able to bind the party together and get through this will depend on the party much more than him. And a lot of the medicine's going to be, I mean, his family's are pharmacists, they give out medicine. A lot of this is going to be nasty medicine, is inevitable. And it would have been inevitable whatever had happened with Liz Truss, although I think that the problem with that, it has exaggerated the cost, you know, it sort of amplified the cost, and also it means that people think, can't blame Putin for that anymore, we're going to blame Kwasi and Truss. So the political cost is actually almost impossible to repair.
Yeah. However, it's looking good in the polls. We mentioned in my big opinion.
He's going to close the gap. He'll close the gap.
Started to close the gap and significantly enjoys higher personal ratings than Keir Starmer after 5 days, not even a week in office. It's not a bad start. What about you? You were, as you mentioned, very successful in the oil industry before you went into politics. What were you thinking? I mean, you could have made a fortune and had a quiet life.
Oh, yeah, yes, I could. But I sometimes look back and think, oh, was it good to give all that up? And yes is the answer. You know, much better to have an interesting life. And it has been interesting. You know, I never hit the big time, but I think it was my generation, really, who kept the Conservative Party alive through the Blair years. You know, we had 13 years, and I did 7 shadow cabinet
You were
jobs.
instrumental in getting William Hague elected, and although he didn't win an election, he was an impressive leader, wasn't he?
And he was then an impressive foreign secretary when we came back into the office, and he, of course, you know, remains a very significant influence in terms of opinions, but also, I think, quietly in stabilising and informing a lot of the Conservative Party at the top level. I mean, he had very close relations with George Osborne and, of course, David Cameron.
Well,
and now I think with Rishi... what?
No one's perfect.
And Rishi Sunak, of course.
You mentioned George Osborne. Do you mind not swearing in the studio?
Oh, I think that's a little bit unfair. I would say one thing, though. I think he made one big mistake. He allowed the language of austerity to be the brand that went with his economic management. And you should never put a negative label, particularly such a long word, which half the country doesn't really, you know, have to think what it means, but they know that it's nasty. He branded his own management negatively.
You're so right. And Theresa May, your former boss, she came in when she was at number 10 and she said it's not austerity, it's living within your means.
Exactly.
Which is a much better message.
Yeah.
And I josh about the coalition government because I've actually said on the record that I think the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives acted in the national interest to form that stable coalition government, which, by the way, seemed more harmonious and united than the previous Labour government.
Or the current Conservative one.
Or the current, exactly. You look back at it as a bit of a golden era.
Yeah, I mean, they all loved each other. It's amazing.
We missed the trick not signing off on those nuclear power stations, for which I guess we have to blame the Lib Dems. But the living within our means, let's call it that, brackets austerity, it got that debt down, didn't it? I think at one point, as a proportion of GDP, it was 10%. It came down to about 2% at the tail end of Theresa May's premiership, which put us in good stead to handle the pandemic. So the coalition government, I would argue, underrated.
No, I agree with that. And also, I mean, back to nuclear power stations, I was Shadow Secretary of State for Trade and Industry then, advocating nuclear power stations. There's a special advisor, Steve Hilton, who made David Cameron say nuclear as a last resort. And all the investment fled.
Terrible.
And that was a bit... Never let special advisors run a government.
No, well...
They are a curse.
Boris learned that, didn't he, quite early on in his premiership. just a few seconds to go. You were very successful as a consultant in the oil and gas industry, and you were an oil trader earlier on in your career. How's it going to play out in terms of this energy crisis? Do you think supply is going to improve and prices will come down? Because that's something that will be at the forefront of Jeremy Hunt's mind at the moment as he prepares that new budget on the 17th of November.
Look, I think we have to assume the worst and hope for the best. I mean, I think it's possible we're off the peak of prices and we're probably okay for this winter. But if someone blows up a gas pipeline or something like that, then we will have a very, very serious spike, and it could be very, very bad. Those are the strategic security issues, which of course are uppermost in everybody's mind. I hope that the subsidies, if you like, that we're giving to domestic and business users of energy will not be as severe as originally budgeted for. So there is potentially some hope, but it all depends on Putin, the Ukraine war, indeed whether Putin survives, be it personally or politically, and there will be twists like that which will make massive differences to the budgetary challenges that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt face.
Do you mean Rishi Sunak? Stop it. Let's not fall into that trap. Sir Alan Duncan, a thrill to have you in the studio. I do hope you'll come back and see us again soon.
Be a pleasure. Thank you.
What a delightful and fascinating conversation. Lots more to come. Next up, the papers with full panel reaction. See you in 2 minutes.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's just gone 10:30, and at this time every Friday, Saturday and Sunday we take a look at tomorrow's papers with full panel reactions. So let's start, if we can, with the Daily Mail. And they're leading with this. Petrol bomber attacks migrant centre. Britain's migrant crisis intensified today with a petrol bomb attack in a processing centre in Dover. Witnesses described seeing a laughing man target the facility with up to 3 improvised devices before he apparently killed himself at a nearby petrol station. OK, next up, we'll go to the Telegraph. Migrants side by side in hotels with the public. Migrants are to share hotels with the public under plans being considered by Home Secretary Suella Braverman to regain control of the Channel crisis. Home Office officials are drawing up proposals for spot bookings of rooms rather than reserving entire hotels as a part of measures to tackle catastrophic overcrowding in the main asylum processing centre for Channel migrants at the disused Manston airfield in Kent. Sunak keeps option open to attend climate summit. Surely not a U-turn. Rishi Sunak could attend COP27 next week, despite previously indicating he would not travel to the summit. The PM said on Friday he would stay in Britain to focus on more domestic challenges. Well, I hope he stands to his words, but we shall see how that one plays out. Elon Musk prompts a Twitter row with Pelosi post. Elon Musk has become embroiled in a misinformation row within days of taking over Twitter after sharing unfounded claims about the hammer attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband. OK, well, that plot is set to thicken. The Guardian next. Ministers accused of Wild West attitude to the UK's national security. Ministers risk creating a Wild West set of conditions in matters of national security by the increased use of personal email and phones to conduct confidential business. Also, BBC local radio under threat from huge budget cuts. And outside, it was chaos. I couldn't move. That truly devastating story from South Korea, from Seoul, in which, in the direction of 150 people, over 150 people were tragically killed in what amounted to a crush. Too many people squeezed onto the streets celebrating Halloween, an awful story with echoes of Hillsborough. The Daily Mirror next. Docs reveal their fears. NHS is facing worst winter on record. Doctors fear a mix of COVID and flu will spark a winter NHS crisis. The Mirror visited one hospital to witness staff battling the so-called twin-demic. The Independent, families mourn as Seoul death toll rises. As I say, that's now an awful figure of over 150 people crushed during Halloween festivities in the city. UK fell short as climate leader, says top advisor. Britain's year of global climate leadership has fallen short on multiple fronts. The government advisor has warned. Lord Debon, the chair of the Independent Climate Change Committee, said Britain's own bid to tackle emissions was off track. The Financial Times, Moscow's ditching of Ukraine grain deal, catastrophic for poor nations. And Northern Ireland power sharing model not fit for purpose, says the Irish Premier. The I newspaper, Sunak under Tory pressure to U-turn over climate snub. Don't do it, Rishi. And last but not least, for now, the Metro, petrol bomb terror at migrant centre. And get in line. Ex-army chief warns politicians over security breaches. Follow the rules or we'll put other people in your place. And those are your front pages. Let's get panel reaction now from Emma Wolfe, Nigel Nelson and David Oldroyd Bolt. And let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph, if we can, Nigel. Migrants side by side in hotels with the public. This is a political headache for the Prime Minister that won't go away anytime soon.
No, it won't. And one for the Home Secretary. She's meant to be tough on migration, and yet I haven't seen her actually do anything yet. Now, fair point, she hasn't been around for a long time. But what you've got to do is, I mean, I think that the Manston Processing Centre just shows what's wrong with the system. These people are meant to leave there within 24 hours or be assessed every 24 hours to get them out there. Either they go to a hotel, or if it looks like their asylum claim is not genuine, they would end up in a detention centre. The danger of what Suella Braverman is doing in Manston at the moment is that it is illegal to keep them there for a month or so, which is what is happening, and an asylum judge is likely to free them and give them their asylum grant. So what she's trying to achieve, she'll actually end up with the exact opposite. If it comes down to putting them into hotels where the rest of us happen to be, well, she may have no alternative. She has got to find other accommodation for these people.
Indeed, as a massive problem. Will we ever tackle this issue, do you think, Emma?
Well, it's clearly becoming really quite fraught down in... I mean, we've seen the reports as well in the papers of the petrol bomber attacking the migrant centre and all of that. And it's really difficult for migrants, obviously, to be in these crowded detention centres, but it's also difficult for local residents. I know someone who lives in Kent, and they're very, very anxious and very, very frightened, and we shouldn't ignore that. I'm not sure what this plan about putting people side by side with the members of the public in hotels, I'm not sure what that achieves, and also how on earth the public are going to respond,
But also, I think the optics of it aren't great, are they? Because it looks like a policy that's out of control.
It looks like a policy that's out of control, that's random, that's desperate. People are already angry about the amount of, the cost of housing people who may or may not be legally seeking asylum in this country. So I don't see what this policy achieves.
Well, we're showing some of the accommodation that's available to people that have crossed the Channel illegally.
I don't think many hotels, Mark, are going to want to be taking in migrants.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's the case. David, many of my viewers will not be happy with those pictures there of the kind of accommodation that very expensively is being provided for illegal migrants whilst war veterans that serve this country sleep on the streets.
Well, clearly the legislation is at fault because the British government currently has, as Nigel said, a duty to house people who may not make people unintentionally homeless, or rather intentionally homeless. There is a great problem here which nobody has yet addressed. France. Why on earth are the French doing this? Because they can act with impunity. Because we have not yet currently, as a nation, said thus far and no farther. And I think this is going to become a real crunch point, and this will show how strong we are as a nation after Brexit, how much we are willing to go to the international community and say, look, this is totally unreasonable. Here you have a country, France, with vastly more area than we do, vastly more uninhabited area than we do, vastly more area, therefore, in which they can have migrant camps, in which they can house these people. Nobody's pretending that France is a third world country. So why are these people being shipped across to us? And why is it that so many of these migrants seem to be men in the prime of life, in good health, and a great many from Albania, which last time I checked is not riven by war?
No, it's not. They haven't had conflict in 25 years. It's technically more peaceful than the Isle of Wight.
And they will be sent back. The Albanians will go straight back, by the way.
They will be sent back, will they? Are those that can be identified and found?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to find them. They're absolutely right. But the whole thing is that Albanians, there's no reason why Albanians should be coming here. The reason they're coming across the Channel is they can't get into the back of lorries now, because that has actually been closed off to them.
Yes, although there was a whistleblower that spoke to GBNews who suggested that Albanians have been advised that if they say they've been trafficked, we can't send them home.
I don't know.
I mean, what do we think about that aspect of it, the so-called do-good lawyers who are perhaps, offering people that have entered the country illegally a route to stay?
Well, hang on. These people haven't actually entered the country illegally. That is not the right term. They're not criminals. The asylum system in this country means if you want to claim asylum, you have to be in this country. And under international law, it doesn't matter what route you take, as long as you actually claim asylum in the UK.
But it's against the law to land on our shores in a dinghy.
Well, it includes people who land on our shores in a dinghy. Yes, that's right.
Well, this is why I say clearly the legislation is at fault, therefore.
Well, it's international law. There's nothing illegal about crossing the channel in a dinghy. You shouldn't actually do it, but there's nothing actually illegal about it. What we should be doing is changing the asylum system whereby people will actually make their applications somewhere else. That would take away the draw of going across the channel to get into Britain.
The NHS is facing its worst winter on record, Emma. Well, look, we could see this coming. We know the NHS is in crisis every year. And these headlines are going to get more numerous as the winter months beckon.
This every winter. And how many more billions do we need to pour into the NHS for it to function properly? What is the issue here?
Do you want the figure at the moment? I think per household, the NHS costs every household in the country £13,000. You could give people a budget of half of that, and they could get great private medical insurance.
They could.
Not that I'm advocating that, but it just
and they could get an answer on the telephone, and they could get an appointment with a doctor face to face.
It's not a scenario I want, Emma Wolf, because I believe in the NHS as a principle.
Yeah,
and I think the American system is far worse.
But nobody's talking about the American system. Every other civilised nation in the world has a mixture of private and public provision. In 5 years, the NHS is going to take up 42% of day-to-day current account spending.
And they will be saying that they are facing their worst winter in 5 years' time.
This is a 1930s solution to a 1940s problem that has failed over 70 years to keep up with massive demographic change, an ageing population, a population that's exploded. It simply cannot work, no matter how much money you put into it.
And when you go into hospitals and you walk around surgeries, and the amount of waste, the amount of people just shuffling up and down corridors, the amount of people who are paid shocking salaries, and we've talked about GPs on this programme before being paid, what, £142,000 for part-time work, chatting on the phone to patients. They won't see their patients in surgeries. I just think, the NHS and primary care are in a desperate situation.
David, you're absolutely right there. What we're trying to do is to maintain a 1948 model in 2022, and it doesn't work. The NHS really does need root and branch reform to come into the modern age. And Emma's right, you just can't keep throwing money at it. It's a bottomless pit.
But it's not even 1948 standards. In 1948, OK, in the 1980s, when I was a kid, you could easily get your family GP to make a home visit. Have you tried to get a home visit for a sick child recently? It's not even heard of. You might get a call back from a duty doctor at some point in the next 24 hours. A home visit from a doctor just does not happen.
Nigel, the Sunday Mirror, your paper is a Labour-supporting paper, nominally at least. And,
well, I think really.
And actually. But the issue is about money, isn't it? Does there come a point where Labour changes the conversation about the NHS? Because normally the answer seems to be more cash. But I'm wondering whether that won't wash with the public anymore.
Well, I mean, I think that the problem actually is the other way around. The problem actually is the public, because there is something about the NHS, which is our greatest post-war achievement, but there's a kind of sentimentality amongst the public about the NHS.
Well, what did Nigel Lawson say? It's the closest we now have to a national religion.
Exactly. And as a result of that,
and the
no
politician...
It's like Scientology, isn't it?
Clapping in the rainbows for the heroes.
People aren't willing to hear that it doesn't work. This is the fundamental problem.
Yeah, and no politician is prepared to say
Until we have a Prime Minister courageous enough to say that this is the national crisis. Never mind climate change, never mind immigration, never mind inflation. This is the national crisis because we cannot afford to keep funding the NHS at the level it requires simply to maintain itself on a barely functioning level, never mind to bring it up to scratch with the rest of the world's health services. This is the point. If you look at the health outcomes, we have worse cancer survival rates than all of the rest of Europe. We have worse care for the elderly than any of the rest of Europe, never mind the rest of the world.
And levels of obesity as well.
I need to double-check this, and obesity is a big problem because the NHS is essentially treating preventable illnesses at an enormous cost. But the other, I think I'm going to check my figures on this, Nigel, but we're approaching a scenario in which all income tax is being swallowed up by the NHS now. It does threaten to sink the country, doesn't it, if we don't reform it?
Well, I mean, I just think that it is unsustainable in the long run. And the essential thing is, I mean, you're talking about a courageous Prime Minister.
Yeah.
We need politicians to be able to have this conversation. I can have it with them privately. They won't have it publicly. Exactly. The moment you attack the NHS, it's a vote loser.
It's a vote loser.
Or the
Any
moment
party.
you tell people that they're obese and they need to stop doing this, that and the other, they won't do that either.
Yeah, there you go. I couldn't agree more. There you go. Rare moment of unanimity from the panel. Lots more to get through. Next up, our quiz of the week. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christys, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Drunk for the 90s.
Well, it's time now for our quiz of the week. Many thanks to my amazing team for putting this together every Sunday. We'll be testing you at home, whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or watching on telly, and my panel in the studio about their and your knowledge of the week's big stories. So here is question number 1. Rishi Sunak became the youngest UK Prime Minister since 1812. How old is Dishy Rishi?
42.
Well done. Do you know who the oldest Prime Minister was to enter office?
Gladstone?
No, more recently than that.
To enter
office. A great war hero.
Winston Churchill.
How old was Churchill when he went into number 10?
70-something, wasn't it?
1951, so he would have been 76.
Apparently 65, according to my team.
Ah.
We might need a steward's inquiry on that one. I'm not going to argue with an iconic historian.
I would say that you should know this one.
Old Droid Bolt's probably got that right, but let's see. Next up, here's our next question. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. Oh, there you go. There's the reveal.
Yeah.
There you go. That's Rishi Sunak.
Bit late.
Looking sheepish. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly advised LGBT people attending what to show a little bit of flex and compromise and respect the culture of the country?
Qatar.
Yes, indeed. Was that, what was that ill-timed, that comment?
As I said yesterday on Darren Grimes' programme, it's perfectly reasonable for the Foreign Secretary to suggest that British subjects ought to try to stop themselves being arrested.
Yeah. It's odd, counterintuitive. You wouldn't expect that from the Foreign Secretary. Next up, the first coins featuring King Charles III, which will be in circulation from December, will be of what value? Which denomination will we receive first?
50 pence.
50p, isn't it?
It is the 50p. Here we go. Let's get the jingle. Oh, no, the jingles are gone.
House band's dead.
Oh, dear. You can tell it's a start-up, can't you? Listen, we focus on the guests. That's where we throw the money. OK, how about this? We've got shoe designer Marcus Floyd has just released a new line of shoes for which animal?
Oh, this is for horses, isn't it?
It is.
You're joking.
What?
It is a horse.
Yeah, they're trainers for horses.
Exactly.
More money
right.
than
I'm sure it'll
sense.
catch on. Nikes for Shergar. Next up, the rapper formerly known as Kanye West was escorted out of the California-based headquarters of which athletic shoemaker? Yes, Skechers. There it is. Yes, he's having a bit of a meltdown, isn't he? I think it's fair to say. How about this? A man nicknamed the dirtiest man in the world for living in filth and not washing for decades has died at the age of 94. Where was he from?
Iraq, wasn't he?
The other one.
Iran.
Iran.
Country.
Iran.
Ah.
It was.
His villagers made him have a wash and he died.
Yeah.
Which begs me
I wouldn't want
to
to
ask
be doing
you,
his post-mortem.
David Oldroyd Bolt, how often do you deodorise?
Once a day after showering, I should imagine.
Pleased to hear that. Nigel?
Twice.
Oh, because do you know something? When I was a kid, you took a bath once or twice a week.
Once a week, yeah.
This whole washing yourself daily is very modern.
Shower in the morning, bath in the evening.
Did you?
What, you got a double?
Sometimes 3. If I can squeeze in a shower at lunchtime, that's extra lovely.
Oh, my goodness. I couldn't do that.
How can you not go to bed clean?
Ask Mrs. Dolan. How about this? What food did climate protesters use to target the King's waxwork model at Madame Tussauds?
Baked beans.
It is. Actually, sorry, it's chocolate cake, so the points go to Nigel. Again, Nigel, we talked about the optics earlier of the illegal. I know you debate that term, but people entering the country and seeking asylum, staying in hotels and all that. The behaviour of eco-activists is something that's another issue for the government, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm not entirely sure what they can do about it, apart from arrest them when they break the law.
Change of the law, maybe? More robust for these protests?
Well, that's one of the things that Sweta Braverman has announced, that she wants to actually crack down on them.
But there's a tension between freedom of expression, freedom of protest, and stopping.
Yeah, but chucking cake at a waxwork is hardly freedom of expression.
These are public order offences. It's vandalism.
Yeah.
So it ought to be covered by the existing law,
Yes,
David.
quite.
OK, well, that's good. It's also a waste of good chocolate cake. What helps you to bond and communicate with your cat, as scientists this week have found? How do you bond with your cat, according to a new story this week? Let me tell you, it's to do with how you speak to them.
Firm commands.
Not firm commands. You have to talk to them in a silly voice.
I'm sure they do.
Most people do anyway.
Yes.
Most cat owners do.
Well, that's bad news for my cat Harry, because I don't do silly. How about this, question number 9? Which player claimed England's record-breaking bowling figures in the T20 cricket during the World Cup opener against Afghanistan?
I know this because I covered it in the week.
Record-breaking bowling figures in the T20.
Got.
Don't know, I'm afraid.
No,
It's
we
an
lost on that
unusual
one.
name, and I can't remember.
Sam. Give you half a point for the surname, Sam Curran. And last but not least, which famous car will be scrapped within a year?
Ford.
Fiesta.
The Fiesta. You can share the points. Very briefly, first car, Nigel Nelson, what was your first motor?
Mini.
A Mini?
A Mini, yes.
A big man.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of owning a Ferrari, isn't it? If you buy a Ferrari, it means you've got a small ego, right? But if you're in a
way it
Mini,
works.
it means you've got a massive
Yeah,
one.
absolutely.
So I've heard. No wonder you've done so well in Fleet Street. David, your first car?
Still never owned one.
Is that right?
10 years in London, absolutely no need for one.
What do you got? Push bike and the tube?
No, I've got an Uber account.
Oh, nice. Of course, I can see you. I can see you in a Prius. How about you? Your first car, Emma?
Bicycle.
Is that right? So you still haven't had a first car?
No, I've failed my driving test 3 times. I gave up.
Oh, dear.
No, but
Neither of you drive?
Oh, well, I passed first time, but I've just never had a car.
In London,
Well, listen,
you don't need a car.
taxi for my panel. Thanks to the brilliant Emma, Nigel and David. I'm back on Friday.
Yeah, there was.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you.
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales,
and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8.